Hi guys, so my name is Neha Raja. I'm not actually presenting as a group, but the site of cultural contestation that I have chosen for this assignment is the statue of Captain James Stirling. This statue is located in Perth City, specifically Hayes Street, and I think most people would see it on their daily commutes. I have also added a warning just because it does contain events and people that may have deceased or passed. Okay, the sights and aspects Perth City. The statue of Captain James Stirling is currently located on Hayes Street, right in the heart of Perth, the CBD, and is actually passed by several people on their daily commutes. So that includes tourists that come in for tourism, people on their way to work, and even children on their way to school in the Perth area. Have you seen this statue before on your daily commutes? Have you seen the statue in Perth City? And when you actually pass the statue, do you know who it is, and does it have any meaning to you? Captain James Stirling was actually an officer for the Royal Navy, and in history, he encouraged the British people to establish and colonise the Swan River colony. Later on, due to his significance and importance in Australian history, he did actually become the Australian governor. His statue was then created and released to the public on the 10th of March 1979. The statue itself does have quite a lot of history. It has been vandalised by people during a Black Lives Matter rally, and during this vandalism, Captain James Stirling's hands were painted red and his throat was painted red, and the script and the plaque that he holds and beneath him were painted with the Aboriginal flag. This in itself was actually a protest from the rally, and the significance of this event actually comes from the deep history of how Captain James Stirling actually achieved the Swan River colonisation. So, Captain James Stirling was involved in what was originally known as the Pinjarra Battle in 1834. The title itself is not actually appropriate, but it is the recorded title in the history for the event itself. The event is also slightly described as a massacre, and also by some, a blood-filled attack on the original owners of the land and the descendants of the victims. So, the Pinjarra Battle is kind of an issue on its own because sometimes it's mentioned as a battle and sometimes it's mentioned as a massacre. Now, some think it's a battle because it was an act of colonization, but some believe it's a massacre because so many people were killed and it was uncalled for and unnecessary. But we do go into the terminology a little bit later. Okay, so during this Pinjarra attack, the victims were an unknown number between 25 to 80 people, and the killings were actually a result of a group run by Captain James Stirling. So, Stirling's group consisted of 25 people ranging from police, settlers and soldiers, and they were all under his charge. The attack itself began at 8 a.m. on the 28th of October 1834, and the captain as well as his group attacked the Pinjarra Noongar encampment that were living in their own land and home. In the following hour, the group had killed 25 to 80 individuals by shooting them, not by poisoning or assaulting them or, segregating them. It was by killing them with intent by shooting. In 1927, a report came from the Royal Western Australian Historical Society by an anonymous descendant of the victim. She found a diary entry from her grandparents who were there during the event, and during that entry, she actually found that they reported there were 80 bodies found buried in a deep hole post-massacre. So that kind of gives a point of concern as these 80 people, so it's now no longer 25 to 80, it is a confirmed 80 based off a report, were found buried, which means someone has actually taken the bodies and put them in that hole. And in that report, she also mentioned that only one individual of Stirling's team was killed, and this suggests that it was a massacre more so a battle. In a battle, both parties fight for their rights, and there are often killings on both ends, but in the case of this Pinjarra massacre, it was only killings based on one party, which suggests why it would be more so a massacre. Given the significance and the background to Captain James Stirling, as he did direct and lead a massacre of Aboriginal people in their own home, it leads to prompt contestation, especially from the Aboriginal community who were victimised. The statue as of yet still remains in its location, and the Black Lives Rally will still continue as the James Stirling statue is a target for individuals affected by the Pinjarra massacre. Okay, so the players that were involved in this site. So these are the images of the vandalisation that actually occurred during the Black Lives Rally, and you can see that Captain James Stirling's hands and throat was sprayed red to signify the bloodshed that he caused, and the Aboriginal flag was actually sprayed onto his script and the plaque laying beneath him to show that it's a call for Aboriginal rights and ownership of their land. And this is my personal inference. I haven't actually found any evidence-based research on this, especially as it's a rally and people did that as a call for protest. I just think that's my personal inference. Okay, and the players involved in this site of contestation include those in the rally, the police, the descendants of the victims, and the Australian government. And tensions occur between these players when the rally members and the descendants are fighting for the rights of themselves and the Aboriginal people, while the police have to seize and remove the rally as it's not appropriate in terms of the government's perspective, and the government is also involved as they have to make the important calls to either keep the statue of Captain James Stirling or remove it. The stakes for all the players in this actually vary. So for the police members involved, they face the threats of being killed, hurt, or even titled as a racist. Police, as they are following the government, don't actually get an opinion on the rally and just have to do what is intended. The Black Lives Rally did have consequences. So for the police, one police superintendent was actually killed by a spear and another one was left wounded, hence the stakes of injury. The stakes for those fighting for the rights, they actually faced charges of potential vandalism and assault, and in the case of the rally, a 30-year-old man was actually charged for criminal damage in relevance to the incidents. For the government and the councillors involved, they have to make the right decisions to resolve the historical complications and ease the contestations that are present. In 2006, the government did actually make an attempt to ease the contestation by the recognition of the term massacre over battle, as that for the Aboriginal people, the events of what happened in Pinjarra was actually a massacre, and the terminology battle was incorrect, and in 2006 it was actually changed. There was a call for increased signage and memorials at the location of Pinjarra, and the government did then later introduce signage and memorial in response to the calls of the Aboriginal people. But for the descendants, their history is still at stake, especially as community elders report that during their education, the subject of the Pinjarra massacre was quite taboo, and they learnt of the massacre through family stories. And the statue itself still acts as a site of cultural contestation because for people of the Aboriginal community, walking past someone responsible for the massacre of their ancestors is still bringing up quite strong emotions, and in their perspective it should not actually still be there, and they are calling for the government to remove it, in addition to the Black Lives Rally, which had the same purpose, was that the site should remove the statue. Okay, so going into the psychological theories, all the players involved actually face conflicts. For the general population, those involved in the rally and the descendants, they want to be responsible for the colonisation of Perth whilst respecting the Aboriginal rights and ownership. And for the Aboriginal people, they want an apology and understanding towards the pain and loss that they've suffered due to the acts of Captain James Stirling. And whilst for some he is a matter of pride, for others he does bring along emotions of loss and bloodshed and anger. So psychologically, while some want something to feel proud of, others just want the understanding and care that they've been stripped of. Okay, so to go into the psychological theories, the psychological effects can vary. For events whom ancestors of the Pinjarra massacre have spoken of the attack, this person specified that his ancestors survived by hiding in a tree. So Originally, they went down to go dancing with no intention to kill, but were instead attacked and killed by Captain James Stirling and his team. This individual that found this recount from his ancestor perceives Captain James Stirling as a murderer, as when you think about it, if someone enters someone's home with a community and starts shooting them, it is essentially an act of murder. And the psychological worldview supports this, as where the world is split into good and bad, there is a basis for racist ideologies. Each player was just fighting for what they saw as a bad guy. So I guess there is a defense that Captain James Stirling saw the people in their land as someone against his attempts to colonize, and for the Aboriginal people, they saw Captain James Stirling as someone trying to take away their homeland rights, and so that's why the massacre occurred. But it is also a matter of racism and terror, because Captain James Stirling chose to do that when there could have been other ways to actually deal with the issue. So he could have spoken to them, gotten to, at least understand what was happening before just raging and taking attack. And another argument is that it's a matter of civilization and not. So Captain James Stirling, coming from his background, was perceived as himself as civilized, and when he met the Aboriginal people, he saw them as less civilized based on their ways. But for Aboriginal people, those ways were part of their culture, their understanding and their history, and therefore for them were civilized. And Captain James Stirling had no right to make a decision on whether they were civilized or not, and that wasn't also a valid justification to take attack. Another theory is the critical race theory, which is a concept that race is more than just a bias, it is also direct from legal systems and policies. So what this means is that things occur, or people treat people a certain way based on the legalities around it. So back in 1830s, there wasn't really much to say to protect the Aboriginal people, and the colonisers and Captain James Stirling just saw them as someone different or a bad guy per se, and thought it was appropriate to attack. But in this given modern society, there are legalities to protect Aboriginal people. The Black Lives Rally matter, and all those legal laws actually protect the people, and now it would not be appropriate to actually attack them. Following the theory, it does make sense that Stirling did kill the people in support of his perception and power, and also his policy to explore new lands. But now that Australia does have acts to protect Aboriginal people, it is an event such as would now be titled as a massacre, and if happened again, it would not happen with no consequences. The law guides the occurrence of actions such as Stirling's. To conclude, my side of cultural contestation was Perth City, and the aspect was the Captain James Stirling statue located in the city. And it is a site of cultural contestation due to the aspect that Captain James Stirling was actually responsible for a large unprovoked massacre on innocent Aboriginal peoples, and as a result, his statue in the CBD results in conflicts, arguments, vandalism and injuries to all the parties involved. There are a lot of stakes for everyone. For the police, there is the risk of injury. For the Aboriginal peoples, it is a sense of rights and an apology for their losses. For the government, it is a call to do the right thing, as well as a loss of their misconceptions or conceptions of pride and ownership in Captain James Stirling, who was responsible for colonisation. And for people involved, it is a matter of what's right and what's wrong, and if it's okay to keep someone who is essentially a murderer, as some would say, right in the city of Perth for everyone to see. It is with fair and valid reasoning post the massacre that the statue should be removed, but it will remain and continue to be a reason for contestation from the Aboriginal people due to its significance and history, as mentioned in relation to the Pinjarra massacre. I really hope you guys have found my slides interesting, or have just learnt some new information. I personally thought this was a very interesting topic to have done, especially as I walk past the city and I have actually seen this statue before, and I originally thought nothing of it, and I didn't actually realise who he was or what he'd done. And when I had realised that it was Captain James Stirling, I was like, oh, okay, the person in charge of colonisation. But I've done my research into the topic, and I do think it's quite alarming that we do have a statue of someone who has murdered or been in charge of a murder of around 80 Aboriginal people, which was unprovoked and uncalled for. And I do actually think that it's wrong, and I think that we should actually do something about it, or that the government should have done something to reduce the implications of his statue.